Okay, welcome to Stampscaping U for University. Okay, let's go way back. Okay, this might be even a preliminary video to the first two lessons in this video series, okay? And this video is on the topic of partial imagery, okay? When it comes to scenic stamping, one of the things that's a little bit different than I would say of the vast majority of images out there is that landscape imagery, a large percentage of them can be characterized as components, kind of within a general structure. They certainly could be kind of more focal point oriented, especially if you have some kind of structure in them like this, like cabins, lighthouses, etc. If you put those into a scene, they would tend to be the kind of a focal point of a scene. But they can also be part of a much greater whole. You can do this on a card size scene like this, or you can do it on an 11 by 17 or a full page card, okay? And it would be certainly be a small component within there, but it would yet be the focal point of a scene, barring, the usage of like little figures and people and things like that. Living things tend to be a very strong focal point as well. But structures are right in there as far as the things that you would look at first when looking at a scene. It would draw your attention, okay? But here's the thing, okay? When we're talking about large imagery, things like waterfalls and whatnot, they could be trees in a lakeside type of situation, going into the sky. They could be a Milky Way, moons, etc. These all can, in theory, be focal points in a scene. We could stamp this and cover, an entire piece of paper, or we can stamp it centralized and put a few trees around it or something like that. And the sky would, it would be a focal point of the scene. This could be the focal point or whatnot, okay? A waterfall and a Milky Way could be kind of, used in conjunction with one another. Which one would, kind of get the attention? I don't know. They'd be kind of be equal players. But here's what I'm getting at here, okay? A lot of imagery out there tends to be kind of real subject-oriented focal point imagery. I'm talking about in the stamping world, be it a little figure of a person. There's a lot of little people imagery out there. Animals, things like celebratory types of things, cakes, or if you're doing a snowman or something like that for Christmas. It's very, very focal point oriented. It's the subject matter of a scene quite often. You might have several subject matters, but they're not going to be kind of like these kind of insignificant in terms of focal point types of building blocks for a scene, like images in nature could be. If we see something like this, if we saw it out in nature, chances are you would see 1,000 trees or something like that, or hundreds of trees in the general area, okay? And none of them would necessarily grab your attention, barring, some sort of different type of aspect to one or a cluster of them. Okay, where does all this play into stamping? Okay, a lot of times when people are just getting into landscape stamping, they might think about stamps of a certain size and say, well, okay, if I'm going to use something like this, then maybe I can't use a tree like this because this is already taking up the vast majority of my card, so it doesn't leave room for something like this, okay? But let's just start off with these two stamps right here, okay? There's more than one way to use landscape stamps. Now, this is all very, very basic stuff, okay, for the scenic stamper, a seasoned stamper. So this is going out to the beginner, of those that might be kind of thinking about getting into, scenic stamping. They don't know where to start, how to choose their images, etc. Okay, so with something like this, with subject-oriented stamping, okay, outline designs of a certain person, they would tend to stamp it centralized, just like people would position a figure. Let's say you're walking somewhere with your friend and you want to take a picture of them. Chances are they put them right in the middle of the frame, right? And you take your shot and whatnot, and then you have your kind of memory of that moment, okay? Well, with something like these certainly could be your focal point, and you can stamp it right in the middle, put a word stamp around it or something like that, and that looks great, okay? But there's more than one way to use scenic stamps, okay? So something like this, we can use partials, we can use kind of the borders of our cards to play into the overall kind of scheme of a given composition. Okay, so I mean, if this was centralized, it would fill up, you know, a large part of our frame here. Okay, now, of course, it all depends on what size scene, you know, card we're working on. A half-page scene would take on a different spirit, but you could certainly stamp this multiple times, okay? So something like this, let's play a few different roles for this, okay? So I can create like a little inlet right here, right? You know, you can have the sun coming in here and it could be, you know, shining through here. I've done 2 different impressions, okay? Let's do a 3rd impression, but where can we possibly do a 3rd impression on this one, right? Okay, I'm just inking this up. Let's come down here and put some of these trees right here into our foreground, okay? Okay, now I might not have left room for my spruce, but I want to make a really good point of component stamping on this one, okay? I wasn't quite sure which side I was going to use here. Let's go with that, and let's stamp another impression right here. Why don't we come up a little bit higher, just so it doesn't look so similar to that other one stamped on the other side. Okay, so we have something like this. Look at this kind of this composition that we're working with. Yes, it's the same image, but I'm just using a different portion of this one. This one's Lakeside Reflections Large. And is there room, perhaps, for yet another one in here? I'm just doing this because, you know, I kind of want to go extreme for this and making this point right here, okay? So, when we're thinking of this, and I'm saying, well, you can use that 5 times on a scene, right? When people are thinking about it in theory, if they haven't done scenic stamping before, they're thinking, it's only going to fit a maximum 2 times on there, even if I maximize the space. But no, we're just using certain components within this design. And that's how all of these designs have been done. I try to make it where it's interesting as a whole, but then I see all of these different aspects. I can even use those rocks down here without the trees. Just don't color in the trees, and we can have more rocks if we wanted to, too. So I haven't even done something like that. Okay, so let's blot this off a little bit here. This was done in my second video where I've kind of played around with varied impressions, okay, in terms of the amount of ink on them. But let's wipe some of this off like this so it stamps out much drier. And if it's stamping out drier on our card, it's stamping out much lighter, okay? Lighter impressions tend to look like they're farther back in the distance, okay? So let's just go about right here. And let's take a look at and see what that looks like, okay? So it's the second impression. And I've also wiped off quite a bit of this before I've stamped it out, okay? So look at this right here. See, it looks farther off in the distance, right? But we have this little inlet right here, and then I would, of course, color it in, and that would blend all these things in. But what we have here is 5 impressions using the same stamp, okay? And to me, you know, hopefully, if I've designed these right, it doesn't look like it's the same image used over and over again, okay? We see these parts to the whole, and we've used different parts of it, but it looks different enough to where we don't get this kind of repetition of imagery and pattern too obvious within this given space. Now, if I was stamping a much larger piece, yeah, you might be able to see, oh, okay, there's that rock used again and again and again. But hopefully it's specific enough to be interesting, but random enough to be different and not so repetitive, when we use it in a repetitive type motion. Okay, so that being said, I've blabbed on. Let's get to some different examples of this concept here. Okay, look at this one right here. I don't know, should we use this one again? Let's use this one again, but let's do it with our spruce tree right here, and let's do this thing about kind of varied portion, or I don't know what we call this. I think I called it dissected stamping or something. It's where you're kind of dissecting a portion, not physically, but just in usage to get different looks out of your given imagery. Okay, so it's just like you have to be able to look at a design and say, okay, here's a stamp like this, but I can also use those rocks, I can use those trees, I can use the left side, right side, top and bottom, and I can get a lot more mileage out of my stamps. So that's always important to me as a stamp designer, to give people kind of a maximum usage of their designs and to really extend kind of the value of a given stamp. Okay, it's really easy to do kind of more of a focal point stamp, but it's much harder as a designer to design something that has kind of a multiple ways in which you can use it. But it's certainly more valuable that way to me as a designer, because I'm going to be using these stamps too. And also when I buy new plates for designs, if I don't have to buy, 3 different plates for 3 designs that should have been designed in one, I don't want to have, I can have different trees, I can have different rocks and, different rocks and trees like that. But if you can get it in one, it's always much better. And then it kind of develops your eye for looking at your imagery in a different way. And when we do that, I feel it kind of extends our creativity in terms of just kind of developing your eye for looking out for the possibilities. And when you do that, I feel that the possibilities are much more kind of extended when it comes to the application of those stamps within your scenes, because you can apply that creativity to your colors and everything like that, because you're already thinking that way in terms of the general composition. Okay, now I stamped that one off before I stamped it in there. But again, here's the partial imagery used in here in terms of the spruce tree, okay? We can certainly use that spruce tree as a central focal point or something like that if we want to make a statement about that image. And it would stand up on its own, but just using it in portions like that really can give us kind of an extended use of a given image where it's repeated, but it doesn't look necessarily so, monotonous in terms of the forms. Okay, moving on. Let's see. Let's have some fun here with some imagery, and let's play around with that idea of, extended usage through the dissection of areas, maybe you might call it, or something like that. I guess that's what we're kind of doing. That sounds really technical, but in a sense, that's what you're doing. Okay. Okay, here's my lakeside cabin. Same type of thing you can do with this one like this. You can kind of put it off here on the side. I can have it down here. I can have it really low and have plenty of space up here for sky or something like that. Or you can stamp it really high. So let's try a couple different ways. Okay, but let's use it with some larger stamps. Let's have some fun here. There it is, stamped like so. Okay, let's say I have some mountain behind it. Okay. Now, is this mountain going to fit in this really small space right here. Let's put it up in comparison. See that? It would go right over my cabin, right? I mean, you could do it like that, but let's stamp this off a little bit, like so. So that's a little bit lighter. Okay, this is going back to my previous video. Let's wipe off some of this right here. Okay, now let's mask off our little cabin right there. I don't have to mask off any trees though, because I've made them solid, okay? If they were outline designs where, you know, there's a lot of space in the branches, then you would have to mask them off. But I make them solid so you don't have to mask them off. And you can stamp right over them, like I'm doing here. Okay, this is probably sticking off. Well, we'll see how much I'm sticking off the page. Quite a bit, okay? So we don't have to have that full statement in there. You see what I mean? You can use that. And I mean, that says mountain back there. We don't always have to have the top peak in there. You certainly could if you want to, but you don't have to. All right? Now let's bring in something else. Let's play around with kind of expectations here, okay? We think about things like sky figures being the sky, right? Well, let's say this is a nighttime scene, okay? And I happen to think that water is a perfect opportunity for bringing sky elements down into the landscape, because I think it kind of extends your mood of a scene and whatnot. Okay, so let's bring this down here like so. Okay. Okay. There's our Milky Way large there. Okay. Let's take this again and let's overlap. Let's say about a good ½ inch to an inch into our previous scene. Okay. And do you see that seamless blend right in there? I didn't have to mask anything off. You just stamp right over it. I could put another bit in here too. We can go like this. So if I said this, I was going to use this 3 times in this little space right here where it almost practically fills it in itself. To the new stamper, they might not think about doing something like that, but the fact of the matter is that you can fill in, but we're just using portions of it. So I've just inked up that little area right here, and this little area right here that I didn't fill in. I'm going to overlap, so I'm going to come in about like that. And we'll just fill that area right in, okay? Different colors will really animate this piece a lot more, but that's your general composition right here. When you have sky figures and your water lends itself to a really dreamy style of composition. But let's check this out right here. We have these 3 images used in a scene, okay? Now to those new to stamping, scenic stamping, they might think, okay, that's not going to fit, right? Because they're thinking they have to have the whole portion right there, that cabin is right there, and they have to have that, that bit right there has to fit in there. Now it'd be a little bit more condensed like that, but a lot of times they're not thinking that, but indeed it can fit. Now let's make it a little bit more extreme, okay? Let's use these same images right here, and let's go for kind of a larger portion of these, okay? Let's play around with the composition again in terms of a kind of a staggered style of composition. I really love this kind of little inlet type of thing. It kind of creates a kind of a snaking style of a composition, like an S-curve, you know? And that's really kind of nice for visual harmony sometimes. Okay, and I don't necessarily want 2 cabins, although you could. You can, we'd call it Neighbors or something like that, the title of the piece. But let's just stamp this, and I'll leave that cabin out, but let's have this coming in from the side like that. So if I told you that, I was going to use some stamp like this twice in a composition, you might not think, oh, it's not going to work because it's not going to fit like that. But when you just use certain portions of it, you certainly can. Okay, now let's see here. I was going to use that mountain back here, but I kind of like to have a little bit of a row of trees. Let's try the Lakeside Cove small stamp here, okay? But let's do that thing where we kind of make it a little bit lighter. And let's wipe off this bottom portion right here. I want to make it seem like it's a little bit farther off in the distance, okay? Alright, so let's go over here, about like so. Okay. And, I don't know, I could put another one over there. Or I can just leave it as that. Maybe I'll just leave it like that. It looks pretty good. And let's bring our mountains in there, okay? Let's do a partial print, okay? Not full black. I mean, you can certainly just ink this up with gray, so it's lighter to begin with. But I've blotted it off pretty good. And let's wipe it off on the bottom like this. Transition it going from dry to a little bit more moist. It's not completely moist up there because I've already stamped it off once, okay? Let's put it right over those trees. You don't have to mask off your trees because they're solid. And look at that composition right here. So we have this mountain in the distance. We have this kind of cove and inlet area like that. Could be in the Adirondacks or something like that. I don't know, maybe not with that mountain back there, but or maybe it could be. That little cabin right there reminds me of kind of the Adirondack areas of New York. I once taught up there. And in between classes, not during the day, but when I didn't have classes one day, I drove up into the Adirondack Museum from a store that was in Rome, New York, and that area was absolutely amazing. I didn't have a chance to go around a lot, but just kind of getting a little bit of a taste of it. And some of my students in those classes, they lived, in that area, so are right on some of those lakes, and they'd go kayaking after work. Actually, I talked to someone when I was teaching in Washington that used to do that too. I always thought, man, that is such a nice notion. Okay, adding in some tall trees like that, but look at this composition right here. This is ready to color in, add in some blues or some aqua greens or something like that, or a brilliant sunset on the water type of color scheme would look really fantastic in this composition. But look at that. Wouldn't that be a really great house to live in? Or if you don't want to live on the lake, all the time, wouldn't that be a great kind of weekend place or someplace you can go during the I don't know, summertime or something like that. But what do we have here? We have this stamp right here, that stamp, this one, and this one, okay? And this is used twice. This one's used 5 times in the sand. Let's put it vertical, kind of in the configuration, okay? And then we have this one in the background, okay? So I don't know, I guess it goes more like this, but you get the idea. This is just a 1/4 page cardstock, okay? Well, we fit all of these impressions in here. This one's in here twice. This one's in here 5 times. This one's, the Rocky Peaks are in here, but we didn't use the whole portion of it there. We didn't use the whole portion of those pines, and we didn't use the whole portion of the lakeside cabin. We used half and half right there. And this one right here is kind of using half. I kind of wiped off a little bit more off the bottom than I thought I would. But that one's the one that's used in its entirety. But it is a 2 by 3 inch stamp, okay? But you just don't stamp out all of it, right? And you can get a lot of mileage out of your imagery. And this certainly is effective as a stamp just on its own, too. I mean, you can see it right here. And that has been designed to primarily be used in its entirety like that as the focal point and subject matter of a scene. But the fact of the matter is that you can kind of, break it up and to make the image whole much more of a smaller statement like that. It's a more intimate use of this image right here, but still very effective in terms of creating an overall and a much different type of composition like that, you know, when you're creating something like this in this little, you know, inlet or something like that. Okay? All right. Let's take a look at some more of these types of image uses here. I think the point is probably been made here, but let's go on and take a look at some other things, okay? Now, I just did something recently with my last few scenes where I've used this in repetition, okay? This is the Babbling Brook right here. And I just used it in a half-page scene as well, and love that, those last few scenes that I did. I just wanted to create something. I don't know, I did one at a full page. If you have a chance, maybe check that out. They are quite long in content, but I just wanted to make something. I just wanted to make a big statement on those pieces right there. But here's a waterfall. It can be used in its entirety, right? And it can be the subject matter of your card, okay? And it used in its entirety like that, okay? Stamp it down, stamp a few filler images around it, you're ready to go. You know, you're ready to color in. It fills in most of the scene. Or we can do something like this. Let's say we're going to stamp this really high up here, okay? And when we do that, what we created is this scene is primarily going to be about the foreground here, okay? We've created kind of the area, or we framed off an area where the water is going to be flowing into, okay? If you stamp it down here, this looks great too, but it becomes more about what's over the waterfall. But let's do a couple extra things in here, okay? This is what I did on my recent videos, okay? Let's grab some more of this image. Let me make sure I stamped up the correct side of this. In fact, let me get a little bit more black ink on this. I'm starting to get a little bit dry. Okay. All right. Let's come down here. And let's kind of create a more interesting pool down here. It would be good, kind of wide open like that, but kind of having a few extra rocks like this is kind of fun. Okay, let's go like this. Oh, let's wipe off some of this right in here. Let's see what we can do here. Let's wipe off kind of the bottom portion of this, and let's utilize the top portion of this one. Okay, so I'm kind of wiping off this bottom portion. Now, I'm doing all these compositions on the fly, so I'm kind of coming up with it right now, but if I knew or thought about it, you know, a few seconds ago that I'm not going to use this bottom portion, the easiest thing would be just not color it in, you know, to begin with. But you know me, I just kind of wing these winging on these videos. It's improvisational stamping, right? Okay, so see that right there? And I've created, you know, kind of open areas in here for the water to flow into, creating these other types of pools right here, but that's all from this one image, okay? It'd be really cool to kind of dissect this portion down here and not use the top portion, but look at that waterfall right there. You know, a little bit different than that one. It has this kind of cascading type of thing. But see, even in these types of scenes like this, I try to create that little bit of an S-curve like that, where the water is kind of flowing like that. And when you create these kind of passageways like this within images, it kind of creates this kind of natural visual harmony and the grace of the image, okay? So if you have it in those things, it gives us a much nicer and easier head start towards kind of, you know, creating a scene with a lot of harmony and grace to it, okay? If we can do it in the imagery and kind of get you, most of the way there, then that's what we like to do. Okay, this is just your boulders with like and small. I'm just kind of creating the little rocks down in here. What size are these rocks right here? If I put this little fisherman right there, okay, we're saying that that fall, is a decent size, right? Or if I put these reeds in here, unless this is some kind of like gigantic 10-foot reed or something like that, it would create kind of a different feeling. It's a much smaller, more intimate little pool. Let's try this right here, okay? Not that this is a large stamp, this is a small stamp, but kind of when we're on the subject of image usage, it applies to small stamps as well, okay? So let's use this one. I don't know if I'll use this one in its entirety anywhere in this scene. I mean, we certainly could. There's some foreground like that, right? Okay. Now let's mask off that rock right there. I don't know if we wanted to go for some kind of variation, I would stamp this in greens or something like that, but let's just keep the Stampscapes U beginner courses nice and easy in concept, and not think about color and all that quite yet. So just thinking about compositions, okay? Alright, so we have a lot of reeds down here like so. It's a little bit too hairy like that coming from behind there. Let's go ahead and use some of this right down in here in its entirety. Something like this. Okay. Plenty of places to hide for things like tadpoles and bullfrogs and, I don't know, nesting birds in here, I guess. This would be a good place to stamp my the egrets or something like that, the cranes in the water. Perfect little spot. Great habitat for fish. Okay? Alright, so that's using the reeds in their entirety in a couple of different impressions, and also just using some smaller portions of it like that, okay? Alright, let's do a couple more of these, and I'm sure you have the point of this, but oh, we just did some waterfalls. I don't need to do that one again. Now let's do something, like a larger subject matter, like this country chapel right here, okay? Let's say I wanted to do the country chapel, some clouds like that, and someone new to scenic stamping would look at these two right here and say, oh, there's no way that I can use this in here, because they're thinking that it has to be used in its entirety, right? Well, you are scenic stamping kind of visualizing experts at this point in time in the video, because now you know how to look at your imagery, right? Stamp this out like so. There's a lot of surface area on some of these larger stamps, because I like to make them nice and full. Alright, kind of a little bit off center, but that's because I wanted to use some of these trees on here again. Okay. I don't necessarily want that same chapel in there, or another piece of it, actually. So I'll just kind of stamp it off to the side like so, okay? In fact, I think I just did this, but I was talking about a different aspect of the, stamping in that first lesson about main imagery, then filler, sky and foreground, or, sky, then filler, then foreground, okay? Let's go with this cloud stamp right here. Let's blot that off quite a bit. Let's blot it out a little bit. I would stamp this in a color. I wouldn't do it in a black necessarily. I do love monochromatics though. Okay, let's stamp some clouds in the background. About like so. Let's go for another impression of it. Blot off. Wipe off. You see how we're kind of building on each Stampscapes U? This is doing, I'm not doing too much different than the first two videos, but we're just talking about a different aspect of scenic stamping, okay? So 3 impressions of the cloud. Doesn't have to be used in its entirety every time. You see I stamped it like that, a little bit right here. Stamped it again with even this 3rd impression, so I blotted off. Went for a softer impression there. And I just restamped it again right there. It had enough ink on it. But look at the depth we've achieved like that. 3 impressions of this, so would it fit 1, 2, 3 like that if I wanted the stamp in its entirety? Maybe not. But in scenic stamping, you just use your portions for the thing that you want. Okay? Sky imagery, filler imagery. How about some foreground in here? Like this, to really balance off and anchor the scene like so. And let's try our oak branch. I just found out the VersaFine inks are oil-based. I had no idea. I thought they were a water-based pigment. As a side thing, I have that VersaFine right here. I like, a reason why I bring that up is a lot of times I like to use the VersaFine inks for my foreground, okay? Because they are so dark of a black. But on this one, we're just working out some compositions. So, again, using just a portion of this. Okay, I don't want to use the whole thing, but look at that right there. Isn't that a fun little composition right here? And certainly if you use other types of colors, you can use greens for the trees instead of stamping them out in black, overhanging trees, and, I don't know, greens, or you can have fall colors on that or something like that. Reeds in the foreground like that, okay? Partials, okay? But again, that's using this stamp right here, this one, and the large country chapel. So, a lot of times, to the newbie, would all 4 of those stamps fit on a quarter-size piece of card, And to them, the answer would be no, because we're not used to doing that degree of overlapping with a lot of types of subject matter stamps, okay, where they're outlines, okay, and they're not meant to be overlapped one over another, and grouped and merged and, kind of brought into a cohesive whole as in a scene like this, okay? So a lot of overlaps, that are happening in something like this. Okay? So anyways, that is my kind of little spiel on overlaps, partials, kind of a mental dissection of certain portions of your designs to get what you want out of a single image, okay? Again, it can be used in its entirety. They can be used with their sibling images. They can be used with stamps from other companies. And the best of all is they can be dissected up and used for certain portions that suit your needs in whatever given composition you're working in. You can use it multiple times in the same composition, okay? So in something like this, I see this as 1 image, kind of 2, 3, but you can certainly use like those rocks right there as a 4th image or something like that without these ones over here. So that's, if you look at all of my different designs, all of those types of things are built into the design inherently, okay? This is a lakeside cove right here, but then we have this right down here, and using grass instead of reflections down here, this becomes a meadow. Or I can have a row of rocks like that. Let's say we wanted to stamp a cabin, and it's in this rocky terrain in Maine or something like that. Well, maybe we don't stamp this out like that, but we use those rocks like that. But see, wouldn't those rocks look great? Wouldn't that cabin look great on these rocks right here? But I can't stamp it right over those trees because those trees are here. So here's this row of rocks that you have. You can do it with or without those reflections. You can put this cabin right in there. Look at these rocks right here. See how definitively I make these rocks right here. Look at these ones right here. This is rocks and grass, but this is the Side Falls large stamp right here. Okay, but here's, I don't know, it's not a freeze stamp, but if you use it as those rocks and grass right there, it certainly becomes another rock. Or here's these rocks right here. So I've designed it where you can dissect these things up like that. And that makes for a more full kind of scenic stamping component, okay? It's not just the designs itself, but it's the portions of it that you can use out of it. And a really good scenic, nature design, in my opinion, comes with all of these different components in here that you can utilize, to give you more bang for your buck or whatnot. We're always talking about kind of storage space when it comes to stamps, People run out of space, and that's completely understandable. So if you have a stamp like this, where you can use it in its entirety like that, but you also have that stamp, you have that stamp right there, or that stamp right there. That's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stamps or something like that. I mean, it goes on and on. So there's kind of a conservation of space too, as well as kind of your money goes into that. Here's a lighthouse like that. You can use the lighthouse with all of these different components on here. Makes for a very dramatic scene. But if you just want some crashing waves, you can certainly use something like that. Imagine those crashing waves with this cabin in the background or something like that, and it becomes a much more coastal type of design like that. These crashing waves or whatever. Could be something like that back there. Or, let's say we have this lighthouse like that, just kind of over these rocks, like that. It becomes, I don't know, it's hard to show it right here, but imagine this right here with these rocks down here like that. It becomes a much different type of setting when you utilize these images like that, Anyways, that is my point right there. Have a kind of a nice discriminating eye when you're looking at imagery, thinking about ways to utilize it. I don't need that big of a stamp. Well, how about that stamp right there? Or that stamp right there, There's different portions for the statement you want to make with that image. Sometimes it's not a statement, it's just, kind of a filler image. This, in instance, on its own, isn't really a filler image, and yes, you're doing like a really big scene, but look at that texture down there, and that rock, if you just color this portion, that certainly could be filler used wherever you want that texture to be. Okay? So anyways, thank you for watching Stampscapes U. That was kind of a good thing for me to go over too, because it kind of reiterates the different types of concepts that the beginner needs to know. And the more people that get into scenic stamping, I think the better, I'm not talking about sales or anything like that, but getting kind of a connection with nature is always a good thing to do, in my opinion. It kind of takes us back to, I don't know, our roots or whatever, and the land and things like that. And I think when we're doing these landscape types of things, it can be a transportive type of kind of experience while you're doing something like this and coloring it in. It puts us into those locations in which we are kind of depicting in our work. And it kind of creates a little bit of a, you might call it a micro mental vacation, especially in light of the things that are going on these days. So anyways, if you have any questions, drop me a note in the comments section. If that video has helped you to kind of expand your usage of your existing stamps, let me know in the comments section. Let me know what you've done with your different imagery and how you've utilized it. I see people, stampers all the time, using these stamps of mine that I've been using for years, and I'll see a completely new creative use of it. And sometimes I have a hard time. It's like, oh, that's that rock used out of that stamp, or they've used something sideways or something like that in a kind of an all new, really creative way. And it's really exciting to see that in everyone's other people's work. Okay, thanks again. Thanks for tuning into the channel.